And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Rubber guys with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with $1 million in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. We got a big one today. We're going to start with a Q&A, and then we're going to talk about Albert Anastasia. When we talk about Anastasia, there is a lot of things to digest with his story. Yes, Murder Inc. is definitely going to be a component of that, and we're going to get into that a little bit. Also, as far as your questions go, a lot of people have been asking me about Detroit. The reason why I'm not answering questions about Detroit is because I'm doing a whole entire show, which is probably going to be like a 3-show deal about Detroit, which I'm already working on. So if I don't answer your question, it's not because I'm ignoring it. I don't know any information about it. The odds are is because it's been covered 1 million times. And yes, I wish I could go back and point you guys to all the shows where I talked about this, that, and the third. But I don't like to repeat myself a whole lot. But usually I will if I can. But I don't like to regurgitate like a lot of questions constantly. And there are people that are on the page that will answer them for you. Based either on their own knowledge or what they heard from a show. So if I don't get to your question, those are the reasons why. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. You can check us out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, send your hate mail to the usual places. But the only thing we ever ask you to do here is to share. Even if you hate us, just share. Now, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about right off the bat. I'm not going to get really long-winded with it because it's kind of a big show today. But the first thing is I wanted to talk about Omerta clothing line. I am sort of talking to them about doing some kind of cross-promotion where people who want to buy, obviously you've seen the shirts, Stop Glorifying Rats, Gentleman's Code, etc., hats, jackets, shirts. They got it all, stickers. I believe they're coming out with rings that have different slogans on them as well. I think we are going to, now this isn't 100%, but I have talked with the people over there, and I think we're going to offer some sort of discount. People will be able to go in and type in Mob Talk Radio and get an extra discount off your clothes. So that's a great deal for everybody, and that's a hell of an offer from those guys. They don't have to look out for me, and they do. But it's all to benefit the listeners. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is shirts, memorabilia, and all this kind of good stuff. A lot of people are emailing me, asking me if I do shirts, if I have sweatshirts, do I do posters, do I do this, that. Right now, I don't. And the simple reason for that is that I don't see a need for it. That's just me. I know a lot of people want it, but the overhead cost of it all, at some point we are going to do that. It's probably going to be once we get to an official website, which I don't have any really news to talk about because I'm working on a TV production right now in pre-production for that. That's why I haven't done that yet. But yeah, we will definitely do some shirts and some Mob Talk memorabilia and stuff like that. A lot of people want that. Now, as for the paintings, a lot of people have been asking me. They are ready to order them. They're ready to go. Here's the deal on that. We're not ready to start selling them yet. What we are doing is cataloging them. Right now, I believe we have close to 30 different ones. It's on canvas. It's really pretty. Good stuff to hang in your house. If you're a Lucky Luciano fan or a Joey Merlino fan or a John Gotti fan, you'll be able to attain and purchase one of those. It's going to be low cost, not very expensive. And we'll be launching that very soon because a lot of people really seem to want those a lot. So we are going to start selling those. But when I say this, I'm only prefacing it of once we release which ones we are going to sell, those will be the ones for sale. We may not release all of them at one time, but there is going to be a first run of about 10 per character, so to speak, and then it'll be a limited number with the Mob Talk logo in the corner, and then we'll have a second run with more stuff. So we've got a lot planned for that. Just keep it tuned to Mob Talk Radio on Facebook. You'll be able to find out all the information about that. We'll post on Twitter and post on Instagram as well. Okay, so some Philip Narducci news. He's no longer in the hole. He is now in general population, and that's a good thing. And I don't want to... Excuse me, I don't want to get into a long-winded thing about Philip Narducci, but there is something that I do kind of want to talk about. And it's, some people aren't going to like it, some people are, and that's fine. Not everything I say people like. People either love me or hate me. That just seems to be the way to go. And this is not a rant. This is more or less just sort of a statement on something. And it is about George Anastasia and Dave Schratweiser. I've said it 100 times. I'll continue to say it. These guys are journalists. They have a job to do. The problem that I have is that these guys for like the last 2 months have been going on YouTube. Oh, there's an indictment coming down any day now. And they continue to sort of serve you up this plate of bullshit. And then like 2 days later after they released their last bullshit video, Philip gets arrested. You mean to tell me they did not know that? They didn't know that Philip wasn't going to get arrested. And the point that I'm trying to make is that listen, when you're a journalist, you get tips from all over the place, from all kinds of different people. Sometimes it's bullshit, sometimes it's true, but you always got to kind of hunt down where it comes from, and you need proof. You can't really report shit without certifiable proof. Now, the thing and the issue that I have with them, the complete issue is they have staked out social clubs, they have staked out Philip's house, they've staked out other people's houses. It just, to me, it's a scumbag fucking move. I don't really, and believe me, as much as it bothers me to say anything positive about George Anastasia, he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to waste his time doing that kind of shit. Dave Schratweiser, on the other hand, is exactly the fucking scumbag that will do that shit. Sitting outside somebody's house, putting a name, putting a title on anybody is fucking ridiculous. And where's the substantiated proof? Now, if we're going to talk that this is coming from the FBI, come on, let's get real. The FBI has made claims for years and years and years and years. Some have been accurate, some have been totally bullshit. But the reality is that anytime you sit outside somebody's house or a business and you give somebody's name, you put a title on them, what do you think that is going to do? And listen, I'm not trying to prove to anybody I'm right, they're wrong, or I don't like them because they got more hits than me. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's about a mutual respect for somebody that you know that they both talk to the FBI. Okay? I don't think that's any fucking secret that they talk to the FBI. But do you honestly fucking think in any way, shape, or form that they're not helping the FBI? They're not helping them by posting outside of a fucking restaurant, outside of a bar, outside of wherever, and putting a name and a title. And the majority of time, they don't even get it right. There are times they kind of get it right, but they never get it 100%. And they never use words like allegedly. It's always like a factual thing with them. This is true. Well, how the fuck do you know it's true? And I'll give you an example of this. How many times have you seen them on their fucking show? We'll say Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is the boss. A week later, no, it's Donald Duck is the boss. A week later, it's Goofy's the fucking boss. They never, ever, ever, ever get it right. They go off what the FBI says. And listen, when you're a journalist, you have to do your undue diligence and research, right? So you've got to get things right. But they don't have to. They don't have to get it right. Now, they get notoriety because George was an author. Dave fucking Ratweiser gets his accolades from an Emmy, which he can stick right up his fucking ass. But that's the point I'm trying to make to you and people can look at me and they can say make any assertions they want to make about me and say I'm doing this or I'm doing that. But the bottom line is this, that there is a gray area which out of respect for somebody, you just don't go. They have no problem getting information from who they say are street guys, and they have no inclination about turning that around and doing some fucking Geraldo Rivera expose. Fucking embarrassing people, putting names to titles to crimes. And they're talking about 2 murders that took place 30 fucking years ago. And they have repeatedly mentioned these 2 murders and tried to half-ass insert Joey Merlino into some of this. And Joey Merlino was serving time when some of this shit happened. So obviously you can't connect the dots there. So all they're doing is giving you gossip and fodder for you to take it and run with it. And that's okay. That's a part of what they do as entertainment. I get it. I have no problem with it. But where I stand, how I feel about the situation is you really shouldn't put a name, face, and title to something unless you have certifiable proof or somebody's been convicted of something. And even then, with the way that these rats fucking operate today, you can't believe anything anybody says. And so the reality of it is this for me, is that they're entitled to say, do, and act however the fuck they want. If they want to be douchebags, let them be douchebags. But I'm telling you from my experience, from what I know, these guys are full of shit. They will spin a fucking narrative till you're blue in the fucking face and you'll believe it. I got a fucking bridge here in Brooklyn for sale. You want that too? It's nonsense. Their information isn't really credible. It is at times, but it's based on gossip. Not fact, but gossip. So, if you want to listen to gossip, by all means, line up for the fucking freak show and the circus show with Ratweiser and Anastasia while they hold hands in the park, whistling zippity fucking doodah and all the other shit that they do. If you're interested in that and you feel like that they're bringing you the top news, by all means. I got no beef with anybody listening to those guys. But what I'm telling you is, from my perspective, they're full of shit. They're shit starters. They're drama queens. And it's all fodder to get them paid. They have no inclination, and they have no fucking moxie. They have no fucking street credit. They have no fucking morals. They have no problem throwing everybody under the fucking bus. But the funny side and the flip side of that, and yes, I'm going to go, Ron Previty is here again, and Joey Merlino and Ralph Natale, because that's what they do. They worship the rats, and they treat real people like shit. And I think there needs to be some sort of justification for that. So, listen, I hang out in South Philly 3 times a month. I think that's very well known. I have a good pulse in South Philly. I actually lived in South Philly for a little bit, so people just know that I'm familiar with the area. And South Philly don't have loose people like that. South Philly somebody from South Philly is not going to go stand on a corner with a video camera and film somebody he thinks is a fucking wise guy. They don't do that. This is not the pulse of South Philly. South Philly is a tough fucking place. South Philadelphians are tough fucking people. And these 2 are like a gross exaggeration of what Philadelphia is about. They're fucking rats. That's the way I see it. They have no problem putting anybody on charges, because that's essentially what you fucking do. If you don't have cold hard facts and you're going off street gossip, because believe me, I've heard enough street gossip in the last fucking week regarding Philip Narducci's case that if I were to listen to half of that, I would be saying all kinds of crazy lunatic. I do that anyway, but I'd be saying kind of crazy lunatic shit that wasn't based on fact. You hear something, you research, you check it out. If it's not true, you don't even bring it up. But these guys are going to say shit, and they're going to put everybody on charges. Listen, it's no secret that the FBI doesn't watch people, okay? That's a reality. And they follow rumors, tips, and all that garbage too. But the thing is, when you have somebody like George Anastasia, who they considered to be a mob historian and etc., not my words, those are the words of other people, and all he writes about is rats and informants, and he takes their word as gospel, as being the fucking truth, when, let me tell you what, the gap between what George Anastasia writes about in his books and the actual truth, huge fucking gap. A monster fucking gap. Okay, so that's the truth. Ratweiser is his little tag-along fuck boy who just does whatever he wants. And like, listen, I love the scenery when they're walking in the cutest little places, holding hands, talking about the Mafia. It's repulsive to me. I don't like either one of them, and that's fine. I'm entitled not to like them for my own reasons, just like you're entitled to like them for whatever reason you want to. But I'm telling you, if you're looking for legit facts and not gossip, you're going to the wrong place. They are regurgitating information that I broke before them, which is funny to me. They're regurgitating the same stuff every other week, just in different ways. And listen, they're doing the same thing I do, and I get it, and I don't disrespect the work that they're trying to do. What I'm saying to you is consider the fucking source, and if you think for 1 minute anything that they do is stand up, you're out of your fucking mind. You're out of your fucking mind. Because I guarantee you, they're not going to approach anybody with some serious heat. They're not going to approach anybody that's tough. Because first of all, a tough guy isn't going to put up with the bullshit. And second of all, it's very easy to be a fucking man when you're standing behind the fucking bushes with a fucking camera pointing it at somebody's house. They didn't know that was coming? You got to be fucking kidding me. They talk all this indictment bullshit for months and months and months and months, and then 2 days later, Philip Narducci gets arrested on some bullshit. On some fucking bullshit. And let me tell you the secret here. The reason why the FBI arrested Philip isn't what you think. $20,000 extortion, whatever the fuck the FBI wants to allege, first of all, didn't happen. That's the first thing. Second thing is, all right, that the FBI is always looking to flip somebody. They're always looking to arrest somebody on bullshit charges, get them in the hot box, and then try to flip 5, 6, 7, 8 other people around them because they don't have shit. If that's the best that they could get on anybody, that's a bullshit charge. It's a bullshit charge. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to fucking stick. I'd be amazed if it did. But once again, this is a situation where they're dealing with a fucking jerk-off informant. It's a jerk-off and a liar and a scumbag, and that's the reality of it. You can never say enough things about Philip. And from my perspective, look, I don't give a fuck what anybody's past is. Your past is your past, and not everything from your past is accurate. People will distort, inflate, and ruin your credibility in a second if they can get some sort of financial or political gain from it. That's the way society works. That's the way society always fucking will work. So, the long end of it is this. I don't respect what they do. I don't like what they do. Neither one of them will have anything to do with me. And listen, I'm the type of guy, and I think that those of you who don't know me personally can ask around, and they'll tell you I will go right to somebody. I have no hesitation. It's not a tough guy act. It's just me being me. I'll go to somebody. I went to fucking me and Ratweiser had words. Anastasia won't respond to shit, so they block you because they don't want to deal with you. And it's not even a matter of harassing them or nothing like that, because I don't do that kind of shit either. I say what I got to say. They want to reach out, they can reach out. Anastasia's a fucking coward. Ratweiser's a bigger coward than he is, so they're the fucking coward twins. They're not respected by anybody in the streets as far as I'm concerned. But that's just the reality of it. So I just kind of wanted to clarify that because a lot of people had questions as to why I was upset about it. And I just think if you're going to call yourself a journalist, have a little respect for yourself. Have a little respect for people's families. Cover a story if you got to cover a story. But don't stand in a fucking bush like a fucking pervert taking photos and then acting all surprised that it happened when you talk to the FBI on a weekly fucking basis. It's nonsense. It's regurgitated shit. And if George Anastasia ever fucking wrote one goddamn book that didn't take a rat's word as gospel and regurgitate all this shit and didn't have fantasies of Ron Prevny and John Vesey in the tub together, I don't know what to tell you. But that's the reality. And in final, and I'm cutting out, and that's the last of it, is that I will defend my friends. I don't give a fuck when anybody says. People can throw morality at me. People can throw, you support this goon, that goon, Jimmy the woman, Joey Bag of Donuts, Jimmy Chicken Wing. They can say whatever the fuck they want to me. But the one thing that nobody can ever say about me is I'm not loyal. I'm loyal to people that are loyal to me. I'm good to people that are good to me. And I will stand right in fucking on Times Square, don't give a fuck, on the courts of the steps of the courthouse, just like I did when Joey was coming out and screamed at the fucking journalists. I will tear them an asshole they have never seen. I will insult them like they insult everybody else, and I will defend my friends. And if people don't like me because of that, all right, fine. That you're entitled to have your opinion. But I'm going to stick up for the people I like. And that's the reality. I have seen the FBI from day 1 to day 752. Fuck people, lie about people, corruption from the top to the fucking bottom. I've seen FBI agents suspended for fucking not acting accordingly, having morality issues, falsifying evidence. I've seen this. This is like the only thing you people ever hear about is fucking Whitey Bulger and fucking Greg Scarpa. How about the thousands of other cases? What about what happened to Carmine Persico? They fucking knew he wasn't the boss of the Colombo crime family at the time. They knew it. They had evidence where there was a wiretap with somebody else saying that he wasn't the fucking boss. But they still fucking locked him up. They didn't bring that shit into evidence. How many fucking court cases have we seen where there are tapes that make informants look like degenerate jerk-off, cock-sucking nothings? And a judge won't allow that in. Why? Because the system is fucking corrupt. The system has always been corrupt. It's perfectly acceptable for a rat to fucking body tape himself and get you talking about fucking whores and buying a fucking dime bag of pot or whatever the fuck the case may be. They can use that against you in court. But you can't use the tapes from a fucking cunt crying in a fucking jail cell about fucking, I'm going to burn this guy. I'm going to write a book with George Anastasia. And yeah, I'm talking about J.R. Rubio, a little punk fuck that he is. That's my point, is that there should be a balanced and fair system, and it's not. It's rigged to win. The government has a blank fucking check. And when the government has a blank check, they're going to do whatever they can do to put your ass in jail. That's the fucking bottom line. I'm not arguing morality that some of these guys didn't do bad things. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, innocent until proven guilty. When did this country become guilty until proven innocent? What? Because I hang out with guys with Italian last names that might know people, that automatically puts me in a fucking subgroup? You gotta get the fuck out of here with that. So listen, I'm not saying that the FBI from head to toe is completely corrupt, but the system is fucking corrupt. The judges are fucking corrupt. You know, they have no fucking problem allowing rats to spew nonsense, and they know it's nonsense, but guess what? It fits a fucking mold that the government wants. And that's my point. And that's why I don't like Anastasia and those guys, because they value rats. You cannot value someone who tells on somebody else because they don't want to get in trouble. A rat is a lowlife piece of shit, fucking nothing, and should pretty much be buried. That's the way I see it. Because if you join the army, right, you all go in the army, you know you might have to kill somebody. It's a part of war, a part of being the government, right? But the problem is that these guys like join the army, kill people, and then run, cry, and complain that they had to do it. If you make the choice to get into life, shut the fuck up, take your fucking time, take your fucking medicine like a fucking man, and be done with it already. You knew you could get 30, 40, 50 years or whatever. Nobody forced you to apply 12 pounds of pressure on a burner. You make a fucking choice. So if you're going to make the choice to be a tough guy in the streets, you're going to be a knockaround guy, then take your fucking medicine like a fucking man. But they can't, because the system rewards piles of shit and crucifies good people. And that's it. And that's my issue with George Anastasia and Dave Routweiser, is they have no compunction about fucking good people, and then they want to fucking play smoochy smooch under a fucking tree with a rat. I don't get it. I don't get it. I understand writing books, you gotta come up with something, right? But for Christ's sakes, have some fucking respect for yourself. We'll be back on Mob Talk Radio. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta brand clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTAMIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching? Go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta brand clothing. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Yes, I know all of you are so fucking tired of the ranting, but you know what? I defend my friends and I'm not going to stop. The minute I stop, you might as well put two in my fucking head and take me to the glue factory. I've been like that since I was a kid. I don't think that's ever going to change. So if you don't like it, do yourself a favor and just forward that part of the show. All right, all that being said, we're going to get to the Mob Talk Q&A. We've got 30 or so questions. I'm going to try to answer as many of them as I can, and then we'll get to Albert Anastasia. All right, number one, the biggest mob earner from Philadelphia of all time would be, in my opinion, Ray Martirano. That's just my opinion. I know that I think it was Forbes or Time Magazine named him like number 16, like in the 80s, for the wealthiest gangster in Philadelphia. So we're going to go with that. Okay. Which of these mob events would you have liked to watch from a safe distance? Andre Katz, William Action Jackson, Phyllis Birdie, James Hydell, or Vincent Falcone? All right, so this is like one of the more disturbing questions I've ever gotten. I know who asked me this. He's a funny guy to begin with. Andre Katz, we're going to pass on. William Action Jackson, I'm going to pass on. All right, Phyllis Birdie got her fucking head chopped off. I don't really think that I would have wanted to stand in the same room that was going on. Jimmy Hydell was pretty much tortured by Gaspipe Casso because Jimmy Hydell had attempted to kill Gaspipe Casso on the orders of Angelo Ruggiero. And Vincent Falcone was the one who basically got whacked, and Nicky Scarfo got on his knees and said, that fucker's still breathing, stab him, kill him. Probably the Vincent Falcone one, only because I think it would have been, and this is very macabre and very dark, but I think it almost would have been fucking hilarious to kind of see, in a sick, demented, fucked up kind of way, to see Nicky Scarfo going crazy because he wasn't dead, and then jumping up and down because he was. So in a weird, dark sense and comedic sort of thing, I find some of the things that Nicky Scarfo did to be quite hilarious, especially the story about Nicky Scarfo tossing a horse off a fucking cliff. That was pretty epic. But for my money, probably Vincent Falcone. Phyllis Birdie, no fucking way. Jimmy Hydell might not have been bad to see Gaspipe work his magic, but not so much. All right, who was the baddest, toughest, most ruthless lady of the mob, be it a wife, girlfriend, or etc.? There's actually somebody whose nickname is Lady Camorra, and her real name is Ermina Giuliano. And she was actually the leader of the Giuliano crime family in Naples. The men originally ran the Giuliano crime family, but they all got arrested, and she stepped right in. Not only would she order hits, but she ran the entire Giuliano crime family in Naples. She was absolutely ruthless. She ran protection rackets, shakedowns, gambling, and would even take part in murdering her rivals. So if you've never ever heard of this lady before, her name is Ermina Giuliano, a.k.a. Lady Camorra. Check her out. She's absolutely... she could give some men a run for their money, let me tell you. All right. Do you think the reason that Luciano was open to giving Chicago control of Las Vegas was because they thought Cuba would have paid off more? What was the breakdown of control in Las Vegas? Everyone says Chicago was in charge, but I've also seen that Kansas City was in charge in handling the casinos. Kansas City was in charge of collecting the payoffs. Ultimately, Las Vegas was handed off to Chicago. Meyer Lansky is the one who brokered that deal, and it really it had a lot to do with Cuba, but it had more to do with once Bugsy Siegel got killed, the mob probably didn't suspect that Las Vegas was going to be as big as it was, and there was a lot of money in Cuba, and I think legitimately Cuba, at least initially, offered them a lot more money, but ultimately the breakdown of control in Vegas really went to Chicago after Bugsy Siegel was killed, and they sort of took care of it, and the money was spread out. New York families still controlled interests in casinos. In fact, I know Frank Sinatra owned a percentage of the Sands, and when he owned that percentage of the Sands, it really was shell for Ray Patriarca in Rhode Island. So they would use celebrities to own shares and get kickbacks, but ultimately Kansas City was in charge of picking up the money and distributing it back to New York families and to other Chicago groups, and et cetera, et cetera. All right. I recently watched the Travolta John Gotti movie, and interesting to see that Neil was telling John what it would take to take Castellano out. What approval would he need, et cetera, et cetera. Was that just for the movie, or do you think John Gotti actually did discuss it with Neil? If so, that would have amounted to treason, correct? How complicit do you think Neil was? 100% Neil Delacroce was not complicit in that. Neil was against that. There's wiretaps that sort of go into that. But the reality of it is that Neil continued to tell John that the boss was the boss was the boss. Even Gotti told Angelo Ruggiero, the boss is the boss is the boss. John Gotti never would have attempted to kill Paul Castellano while Neil Delacroce was alive. It would have caused major problems. Do I think Neil would have defended him? Probably not at that point. I don't care how close they were. Neil was an old school guy. And so if John had moved on Paul Castellano with Neil still being alive and in relatively good health, I think that would have had a different ending. I also think that it ultimately, Gotti and the Gambinos had a lot of issues with Paul Castellano to begin with, but the reality is that Neil protected Gotti as long as he could. Neil dies. Gotti moves on Paul under the guise of a lot of different reasons, but he also felt like Neil Delacroce was disrespected in death because Paul Castellano didn't show up to at least pay his respects, and that was another prime motivator for Gotti in the end. But no, he definitely did not sit down and discuss murdering Paul Castellano with Neil Delacroce. Absolutely never happened. I think that was just for emphasis of the movie. There's a lot of things in that movie that were very, very accurate and a lot of things that weren't. And that's just the reality of Hollywood. But no, he absolutely under no circumstances sat down with Neil Delacroce and discussed killing the boss of the family. All right, how powerful was Jimmy Napoli? Is he the biggest numbers kingpin of all time? What was his connection to Ruby Stein? And is it true he plotted to murder John Gotti? Jimmy Napoli was a captain in the the Genovese crime family from the 50s through about the 1980s. And he ran one of the biggest gambling operations ever and numbers racket ever. Jimmy was respected, and he had friends and constituents in all the 5 families and even fixed boxing matches back in the 60s. According to the FBI in the 1970s, he had the biggest number racket in the United States. And also apparently employed 2,000 people and grossed over $150 million a year. He ran operations from Greenpoint, from a lounge, and then I believe in 1988 he was indicted for murder conspiracy charges resulting in discussing a murder plot against John Gotti, Gene Gotti, and an associate named Irwin Schiff. Jimmy Napoli also was partners in the bookmaking and numbers racket with Ruby Stein, but it was really, that was their connection. They were partners in that business together. Ruby Stein had a huge book, so him and Jimmy Napoli were partners, but ultimately it was the Westies and Jimmy Coonan who ended up taking care of Ruby Stein, and there were a couple of reasons for it. The first one was that Ruby Stein was pretty much the who's who of loan sharks, had a huge book, and everybody wanted it. Also, it was the fact that Jimmy Coonan owned Ruby Stein $70,000, and he didn't really want to pay him back, which might have been probably the more realistic of the reasons, but it was actually the Westies goon Danny Grillo who fired 6 shots into Ruby Stein in a bar in Manhattan. And so reality was Jimmy Napoli one of the biggest? Absolutely, but you also have to understand that Tony Salerno completely controlled Harlem, completely grossed over I believe it was something like $400 million a year. So that may be a little bit of, I think that was like the inflation from the difference, but I think Tony Salerno ultimately probably was bigger moneymaker than Jimmy Napoli, and he also, you got to understand that Tony Salerno also controlled all the numbers rackets in New York City as far from the Genovese perspective. It's also known that Jimmy Napoli worked for Tony Salerno in many sort of respects. So to say that he was the number one, sure, in many aspects, but also in many aspects, we can't bypass Tony Salerno either. But that's sort of how that all went down. All right. Is it true that Richard Kuklinski was involved in the Paul Castellano hit? No. Richard Kuklinski. Okay. So I get this question a lot. Richard Kuklinski had nothing to do with the Mafia. Richard Kuklinski was a serial killer, nothing more, nothing less. Richard Kuklinski never worked for anybody. In fact, it was Roy DeMeo who beat the piss out of Richard Kuklinski when Richard Kuklinski was bootlegging the porn business. Roy DeMeo found out and pretty much shook him down. He never did a hit for Roy DeMeo. He never really killed anybody that was a made guy on orders from a made guy. Richard Kuklinski was completely and utterly 100% full of shit. Serial killer. not a gangster. Definitely not a gangster. All right, who was the stronger, the Valentis or the Greek or the Philly Greek mob? I think, in my opinion, once again, here we go. We're going to have a compare and contrast with Philly and New York. First of all, Philly is a small area, right? And that's not in terms of the Greek mob, okay? When you operate in a smaller area, you have to move outside of your area. New York has 5 boroughs, has a ton of people, ton of things going on. There's more money to be made here, more membership here. That's just the way it's always been. That's not in any way to say anything derogatory about Philadelphia, because Philadelphia is tough in and of itself. Don't get it twisted. But the Valentas definitely were. They were big in the 80s and 90s, operating exclusively in New York City. The big moneymaker for them was legal gambling, and the organization still is active loosely today. And they operate within the bounds of the Lucchese crime family. The group originally generated from the Maniac Greek family, run by Pete the Greek Kourakos, and they would become sort of a bigger group under Spiros Valentes, who had deep ties in the Mafia, especially with the Lucchese crime family, so there's your Lucchese crime family connection. And they operated mainly out of Astoria, Queens. They had over 30 members and gained power in Queens and Brooklyn during the 80s and 90s by setting up bookmaking and taking over illegal gambling, which included racing parlors, dice games, and etc. The Philly Greek mob is actually an ally of the Valentes family. The Philly Greek mob is, from what I understand, pretty much done today. There's still some Greek guys that are loan sharking and etc., but they were really big in the 80s and 90s as well. The first real boss, and I'm going to have a hell of a time saying this name, but the first boss was Steve Jesus Christ, I can't read Greek names. Kondianis, who ended up doing life without parole, and then Steve Boris took over. Boris would actually unify the Greek mob in Philadelphia, and they got into loan sharking, extortion, bookmaking, drugs, and etc. But he would actually be gunned down by Ray Mortorano, along with radio personality Jerry Blavlat on Nicky Scarfo's orders. And because Boris refused to pay Nicky Scarfo its street tax, is why he was killed. Nicky Scarfo did the same thing with Harry Riccobene and the Riccobene faction. Listen, under Nicky Scarfo, you paid a street tax. If you didn't want to pay a street tax, you were going to get whacked, and that's just the end of it. Nobody has ever been convicted for those murders, but that's the reality of the Greeks. Now, we are going to cover some Greek mafia here in the next couple of weeks. I got a bunch of different stuff we're going to do, because it's always important to kind of ebb and flow and jump off. We're going to cover Hell's Angels a little bit, the Triads, and some other groups, but this is always mainly going to be a mafia type of thing, but we're going to cover all facets of organized crime. All right. Is the mafia in Canada more powerful than the United States right now? Yes, and the reason why I say that is because of their non-reluctance to kill people. I've said this before. I think when you have a situation where one second. All right, I think when you have a situation where nobody's killing nobody anymore, you sort of lose power. There's two things that ultimately control organized crime: politics and the availability to be violent. Beating somebody up is one thing. The feds have made it too easy for guys to run and tell. There's cameras in every corner now. So I think when you lose the inevitability of killing somebody as retribution, or if somebody is in fear you're going to kill them, you lose a lot of your power. Now, what we're seeing in Canada specifically, they're killing each other every other day there. There's a power vacuum in Canada. There's a lot of struggle there. Now, if you were to take... But Canada is also not unified either. That's going to be the difference between Canada and the United States. We have 5 families here. You have the Traficantes down in Florida. You have Philadelphia. You have Louisiana. You have Texas. You have a subgroup in Virginia Beach, Virginia, believe it or not. You've got Russian groups here. So let's just talk about the Italian perspective for a second in New York. They're all unified to an extent where they're all semi-related in certain things. Canada specifically isn't. You have Ndrangheta, Camorra, Catrones, you've got the Rizzutos, and then you've got the bikers, and you've got this subgroup and that subgroup, the Lupinos. There's all these little subgroups in Canada, and I don't think they're as big as the United States. Now, they have different global sort of aspects to what they do, but they're powerful in the sense that they can kill people, and they do regularly. They can control politics there. New York lost the political machine a long time ago. They still control unions, labor unions, construction, concrete. Those are the big mob moneymakers, and that's never going to change. However, what I'm sort of seeing, and I could be wrong about this. This is just my opinion, but it's based on a lot of things that I am seeing, is that if Canada controlled politics in certain areas, when Frank Costello, for example, they called him the prime minister for a reason. He controlled politicians. If you control politicians, you have basically a card to do whatever the fuck you want in the city, and that's when the mob was in their heyday. Nowadays, it's not sort of like that. Sure, you may run a union delegate, you may know a longshoreman guy that could get you stuff here, get you stuff there, but it's different today. But I think murder really is going to be the common denominator here, and that's what's going to separate guys from being, and that's no way, shape, or form to say they're not tough. It's just, I think when you are ready, willing, and able to use a pistol, and you prove that time and time again, then you have some serious fucking power. I don't think Canada, in any stretch of the imagination, could tell New York or other subgroups what to fucking do. But that's the reality of it. Okay, will you do a show on the Greek Mafia? Yes, that is coming. We are going to cover the Greek Mafia big time. All right, would you consider Bumpy Johnson the highest-ranking black gangster associated with the Mafia? Absolutely, 100%. Listen, Bumpy Johnson, he really doesn't get the respect he deserves. A lot of people want to jump on Frank Lucas and fucking some of these other fringe guys. Frank Lucas and, what's his face? You guys know who I'm talking about. Nicky Barnes. A lot of people want to jump off of them. If it wasn't for the Mafia, Frank Lucas couldn't do business. If it wasn't for fucking the Mafia, Nicky Barnes. Where do you think Nicky Barnes got his shit from? He got it from the mob, who stepped on it a million fucking times before he sold it. But ultimately, the one guy that they respected the most was Bumpy Johnson, and that's because Bumpy Johnson had close ties with Lucky Luciano, but he really got his start with Stephanie St. Clair. If you don't know who Stephanie St. Clair is, she was I don't want to call her a madam because that gives you like a connotation that she ran prostitution and shit like that. She was a numbers racketeer. Beautiful lady, absolutely fucking deadly. Look her up, Stephanie St. Clair. It's very interesting to read a couple of things about her, and she was really a powerful person in Harlem in those days. But she dominated the Harlem and the drugs and numbers rackets, and Bumpy Johnson goes to work for her, and ultimately at the end of the day, he joins her in war against Dutch Schultz. And what was basically going on is Dutch Schultz and the Mafia was trying to push into Harlem and push St. Clair out. She refused to buck, and there was a war that took place, and St. Clair... between St. Clair's faction and the Mafia, there were over 40-some murders in a relatively short period of time, dozens of kidnappings and other stuff that went on. The problem is that the Mafia really controlled the political machine at that time, and they were able to push them out in different ways, not just by being violent, but going to political movers, to police. The police harassed Stephanie St. Clair nonstop to the point where she went to the press, which was probably a stupid fucking thing to do, but she was trying to keep control of her turf. And she didn't want to give in to Schultz. She didn't want to give in to the Mafia. She didn't want to give in to the police harassment. But ultimately, just the sheer amount of violence and murder at some point, is enough is enough. And one of the things she actually did is when Dutch Schultz got shot and was in the hospital dying, she sent a telegram which was read to Schultz as he lay dying, and it read, as ye sow, so listen to me stuttering all over myself. All right. As ye sow, so shall we reap. So in other words, it's like whatever you get's coming back on you tenfold. He died the second after he heard that. So she had the last word with him. And it was a couple of days after that Stephanie St. Clair sort of stepped down and was like, I'm done with this shit. And Bumpy Johnson took over. And what Bumpy Johnson had a 4-decade relationship with the Mafia and a 4-decade run. This guy was no joke. I don't want to get into a whole biography of him, but yes, I believe that he's probably the highest ranking black gangster ever associated with the Mafia, and he could keep his mouth shut, and that's important. All right. Who would you rather have your back going into war? The Columbos, the Bonanos, the Lucchese's, or Philadelphia? Wow, Philadelphia. All right, so if I'm going into war, do I want the Columbos? They're crazy, but no. The Bonanos, no, because they all get arrested. The Lucchese's, deadly, or Philly. Honest to God, and listen, a lot of people are going to roll their eyes, but if God forbid if I had to go to war with somebody, I want Philly with me, and I'm going to tell you why. The bonds. I've always said this about specifically Philadelphia, and there's some other groups that are like this as well. You cannot crack the fucking wall of friendships that go back 40 years. You just can't. You just can't. People can have their own opinions. People can say what they want, but it would be like asking me if, God forbid, something was going to happen to me, do I want 20 people I've known for a year, or do I want fucking 8 people I've known for 30? I want 8 people I've known for 30 years because I know they're going to have my back. And so in my particular situation, I would rather be with Philadelphia because I think they're loyal. I think their roots are deep, and I think it's all for one and one for all there, which I can't say that for some groups in New York. I don't think that groups in New York are all for one and one for all. I think there's a lot of political narratives in New York. I think there's a lot of ego, and I think there's a lot of me. And I don't say that about anybody specifically, but I just think that's the reality. When you have a group of 250 people, they're all out for them, right? So the reality is there's a couple of money makers and a whole lot of fucking guys struggling. In my opinion, with Philadelphia, it's when you have deep roots and people are close, that is a wall you cannot penetrate under any fucking circumstance. So for my money, that's pretty much the way I think that I would go. People may not necessarily agree with that, but that is definitely the way I would roll. And that's what separates Philadelphia from a lot of other groups too. I've said that before, and I will probably say that till the day I die. But when you're tight like that and you have a wall that's indestructible, that's better than having 250 guys that'll grab burners and go to town. All right. Do you know of any of Tony Accardo's allies and enemies in the commission in New York specifically? To my knowledge, he didn't have any enemies. Tony Accardo kind of did his own thing. He represented the outfit. Ultimately, I don't think that Tony Accardo or even Paul Ricca took orders from New York. I think they kind of did their own thing. But if you go prior to them with Giancana, I think Giancana's big problem was he was told what to do and didn't like it and created a lot of problems. But I don't think really specifically that he had any enemies or really any allies. I think what was good for business was good for business. All right. Who is the most powerful Genovese captain in New Jersey between Willie Moretti, Richie the Boot Biardo, or Gyp DeCarlo? I think Gyp DeCarlo, hands down, was the most powerful Genovese captain ever in New Jersey. There's a lot to be read about Gyp DeCarlo. You can look it up for yourself. In fact, the book that I have on my desk, and I've talked about this book before, it's called From Murder Incorporated to the PGA Tour, The Remarkable Untold Story of Charlie the Bug Workman and his son PGA Pro Chuck Workman. The book was written by Chuck Workman, who recently passed away back in January, with Peter Semino. Gyp DeCarlo is mentioned a lot in the book. Really interesting stuff. Definitely go out and get the book if you can. But I think for my money, Gyp DeCarlo was the guy. All right. Besides being a Genovese captain, he controlled the loan sharking, illegal gambling, and everything. He was able to take care of shit that a lot of other guys couldn't take care of. So go out and get the book, and you can read more about him. There's a large part about Gyp DeCarlo in the book. All right. To your knowledge, was there any beef or working relationship between the Black Mafia and the Bruno family? To my knowledge, no. Listen, the Black Mafia family was a bunch of fucking Muslims. Not even really Muslims. They're the Nation of Islam. They kind of did their own thing. I don't think they may have kicked back in a sense, but I don't think necessarily that there was a working relationship there. These guys were doing drugs and robberies and etc., whereas the Bruno family was a little bit more constructed in terms of organized crime. All right, what are your thoughts on the? Nope. Let me pass that one. Because the reason why is because I'm going to talk about this next week. So let me skip that. All right, why do you think J. Edgar Hoover never never went after La Cosa Nostra, seeing as though Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger and made a fortune. Shouldn't have La Cosa Nostra stepped in when Bobby started going after them. I think I may have wrote the question wrong here. I think it shouldn't have Joe Kennedy stepped in when Bobby started going after him. I feel like Joe Kennedy doesn't get enough blame for his son's death. You're absolutely right, and this is one of the listen, all the questions I get are good. This is a highly intelligent question, and the reason why I like it is because, first of all, J. Edgar Hoover didn't go after them because he was getting paid off. The second thing is they had nasty photos of him wearing fucking cross-dressing clothes and being a half gay guy, I guess the way it was. They had dirt on him, and so he was going to do whatever the Mafia wanted because he got kickbacks. There's also this stuff in World War II with the mob working with the government, and this is before all of that stuff kind of came out. So they pretty much owned J. Edgar Hoover at that point. And Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger and a drug dealer, and that's where he made his fortune. And the fact that he used the Mafia to get his son elected, especially in southern states that did not believe in Catholicism and hated Catholics, and even in Chicago, where Kennedy should have been a sure win, there were issues. And I think that the fact that Joe Kennedy used Frank Sinatra to go to the Mafia to sort of arrange this, and then pretty much stood back as his son was elected president, and then Bobby Kennedy went crazy on the Mafia. I think that Joe Kennedy is a lot more responsible for his son's death than a lot of other people. Ultimately, he didn't pull the trigger. But he is responsible because he wanted his son there. He was willing to go to the Mafia to get it done. And then he essentially watched as Bobby went fucking crazy. And ultimately, both John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy paid for that. And it's unfortunate. Bobby Kennedy did a lot of fucking sick, disturbing shit to people. It's also rumored that Bobby Kennedy was at Marilyn Monroe's house a couple hours prior to her death. So there's a lot of different conspiracy theories we can roll with, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, John F. Kennedy doesn't get elected without the Mafia's help, at least it doesn't happen without Sam Giancana, it doesn't happen with the Chicago outfit, it never happens. So they owed the mob, and basically I don't think it was John F. Kennedy that necessarily wanted to shit on the mob. I think it was just Bobby Kennedy wanted to make a fucking name for himself and went crazy, and we know sort of how the rest kind of went down in history. All right. Did Detroit have the longest serving boss ever? Yes, Joe Zerilli was acting boss from 1936 to 1977, and Anthony Giacalone was the street boss from the 50s up until 2001. And I don't want to get into Detroit because we are going to cover them in full detail. All right. Is there a small family forming in New Hampshire? No, the Patriarch of Crime family still owns New Hampshire. They always have owned New Hampshire. So if there's anybody there, it's definitely going to be the remnants of the Patriarchas. There may be some Springfield guys there. I highly doubt that, but I think the reality is the Patriarchas are still in charge of New Hampshire. Which family outside the five families carried the most weight and were respected by New York? Very simply, three. Chicago outfit, the Patriarch of Crime family, probably realistically the Trafficante crime family. Probably of those three, probably the Trafficantes, then Chicago, then probably the Patriarch of Crime family. Also, let's not forget the Carlos Marcello crime family. They were very politically oriented. The Buffalino crime family, but honestly, really, if I had to answer that now, I think Russell Buffalino, I mean, hands down. But I think ultimately the Trafficante crime family, Chicago, and the Patriarchas definitely were probably a couple of the families outside of the five that carried a lot of weight. Are you ever going to do a show on Tony Spilatro? I am. At some point. There's this whole Chicago thing I'm going to do, a Detroit thing I'm going to do, a Cleveland thing I'm going to do. So there's a lot of stuff coming. You just have to be a little more patient. All right. Do the New Jersey factions of the New York families get the same respect as the crews in Brooklyn and Queens? Or are they considered the minor leagues? It depends which faction you're talking about. If you're talking about the Cherry Hill Gambinos, forget about it. They have a lot of power. If you're talking about the New Jersey Genoveses, they got a lot of power. Other than those two, I wouldn't say minor leagues. They all represent some serious people. And I think that they do get the same respect because they have the backing of New York. That's what the difference is. If they were just there and didn't have the backing of anybody, that's a completely different story. All right, so would Tony Ducks have to have a sit-down with Jimmy Burke, or would he have to go through Paul Vario? First of all, Tony Ducks never would have sat down with Jimmy Burke in a million years. Jimmy Burke was not a made guy. Jimmy Burke would have really essentially worked extensively. He worked with John Gotti, but he also would have extensively had to have worked with Paul Vario. He probably would not have gotten to sit down with the boss. He probably would have had to go through intermediaries as well. So, listen, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't move in the same circles at times, but a boss wouldn't sit down with Jimmy Burke. It would just be more or less a message sent to Jimmy Burke, this, that, and the third, and that would be it. And they would always go through middlemen, never the boss himself. All right, who had more power in the labor unions, Johnny Dio or Tony Provenzano? By far, Tony Provenzano had more juice when it came to unions. Tony Provenzano was a fucking maniac, and he also had Jimmy Hoffa. He ran Jimmy Hoffa. He owned Jimmy Hoffa. Ultimately, he's the one that wanted Jimmy Hoffa dead with a lot of other fucking people. But yeah, Tony Pro, for my money, had more power in the labor unions. All right, what's going on with the Asian triads? Do they have anything to do with La Cosa Nostra? Absolutely zero, none. I'm sure that they, in Manhattan, they function a little bit, probably bump up against each other a little bit here and there. But I think at the end of the day, no, they don't have any business ties together. And that's just my opinion. I could be completely wrong. Seems like when someone gets put away, the family at least took care of them a little bit when they were incarcerated back in the day. Seems like today's Mafia doesn't do that. Any thoughts on that and how it affects things today? It seems like a little insurance could go a long way today. That's a really good point, and I think you're right. I think back in the old days, they would take care of somebody, maybe not necessarily an associate, but a made guy would take care of somebody's family because it ensured silence and ensured happiness, and it just sort of made the situation a little bit better. It may not bring their husbands back, their brothers back, their cousins back, their uncles back, their sons back, but it at least enabled people who were financially sort of relying on their relatives to take care of them who go to prison. It made things easier. Does that happen today? No, not really, not at all. And I think that definitely creates problems. If you look at the mob rat Mikey DiLeonardo, Scars, said everybody took his rackets, nobody gave him any of his money. That's why he ratted. That's not why he ratted. He ratted because he was a bitch and didn't want to do time. But that was his argument, and I think that today's mafia in certain areas, not all of them, but in certain areas, are greedy. It's all about money. It's all about, well, fuck him. He got arrested. Who gives a shit? I'm sure there are situations, in fact, I know of one where some people do look out for other people, but how much can you look out for somebody? I think the old days of the 60s are definitely gone. I think that those days are definitely over. Would it go a long way for insurance? Yeah, but it still doesn't bring back a husband, a brother, a father, and etc. So, we know Las Vegas was skimmed. How did they end up splitting money? Pretty much it was split all the way around. Chicago took a part. New York had interests. But I think Chicago truly, at the end of the day, made the bulk of that. Once again, they had Tony Spilotro out there running things and sort of looking over things, and he fucked that all up for them. But ultimately, that's how it went. All right, so when the mob says they're opening books to allow new-made guys, what does that actually mean? Are there actual books each family has and a list of who's who and where they're from and etc.? No, there is actually no book. Now, there have been guys that have been caught with inducted made members on sheets of paper and stuff like that throughout the years. But no, they don't actually have a book. And what they mean is when they say they're opening the books, it means they're allowing new membership, new people to be inducted. New York has a non-opening the books policy and has been that way for a very long time at this point. And, like I said, I'm not like near anybody that could tell me different. But from what I understand, the books have been closed for a long time in New York. But basically, it's just saying, hey, we're going to open up for new membership, and that's the way it goes. All right, do you think that Frank Sinatra was actually telling the truth when he testified before the Nevada Gaming Commission about knowing Carlo Gambino, Paul Castellano, and other mob guys in that famous photo from the Westchester Theater? Yeah, I do. I think he was telling the truth. He didn't know Carlo Gambino. He had met him once or twice, but those contacts really, truly came through Jilly Rizzo. A lot of Frank Sinatra's contacts, obviously the Morettis, he was very close with. The Fischetti brothers, he was very close with. He knew Lucky Luciano very well. But he didn't even know that Carlo Gambino and those guys were there. He was told kind of at the last minute. And what's he going to do? Tell them to fucking beat it? No. So I believe him when he testified before the Nevada Gaming Commission that he didn't know them, because I don't think he really did. Now, the other Nevada hearing that they also asked about was Sam Giancana back in the day. Then he definitely lied. I don't think there's any way around it. Giancana was seen on the property. He was spotted with Giancana. That was a lot harder to deny than him simply doing a concert and a benefit show, and these guys show up in the back, and he takes a photo. Taking a photo doesn't mean he knows them. But from everything that I've ever been able to sort of hear and sort of digest about that, Sinatra knew a lot of people. But was he lying? No, not necessarily. I don't think he knew them on a first-name basis. Had he maybe met one or two of them before? Absolutely, I'm sure, but that doesn't mean you know somebody. So I don't think he was necessarily lying. He was just sort of tongue-in-cheeking. The question is, do you know this person? Well, no, I've met them twice. I don't know them. I just met them. So I think he was being honest in that respect, but I don't think he was necessarily in the other gaming hearing when he lied about Sam Giancana. All right, with Philip Narducci locked up, is it time for Philadelphia to worry? No, I don't think so. Listen, the FBI is always going to do what the FBI is going to do. One arrest does not mean it's a domino effect. This is a simple, probably an isolated situation. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and repeat a bunch of gossip and rumors without sort of solid stuff. But I think the reality is this is not a domino effect. This is one situation. But listen, let me just tell you for a fact, the general consensus is that I think the general opinion is basically, fuck them. Fuck the FBI. Let them come. Nobody is going fucking anywhere. That is probably the best statement that I can give. That's probably the most honest statement I can give. And I think that's as blunt as I'm going to get with it. I think that I don't think anybody's sweating shit. I don't think anybody's worried about shit. Think about it. The FBI is continuously, and George Anastasia and Ratweiser are continuously talking about shit that was from 30 fucking years ago. If that's all they got nothing. And you know what? If the FBI wants to come, fuck them, let them come. Nobody's going anywhere. We didn't do nothing. And that's just the reality of it. So, all that being said, that's going to be all for the questions today. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about Albert Anastasia. Stay tuned to Mob Talk Radio. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta brand clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTA.MIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching? Go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta brand clothing. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking Albert Anastasia. He was born Alberto Anastasio in 1902 in Calabria, Italy. Albert came from a huge family had 11 siblings. His father, Raphael, tragically died relatively young right after World War I. By 1919, Albert had emigrated along with the 3 of his brothers to New York City while under the guise of working on a freighter ship. They had gained employment on a freighter whose port of call was Italy, and upon arrival into New York City, jumped ship and illegally entered the United States. They would soon find work as longshoremen, working on the Brooklyn waterfront. In March of 1921, Anastasia would be convicted of murdering a coworker by the name of George Torino, which would come as a result of missing items on the dock. It was long suspected that Anastasia was paying off other dock workers to let a few boxes slide here and there, and Albert would move the boxes onto a truck and sell stolen goods in Brooklyn. Torino would ultimately find out and would accuse Anastasia for stealing, and Anastasia killed him right on the spot. Anastasia would be arrested and convicted and sentenced to death for this crime. He would be sent to Sing Sing to await execution. However, due to a legal technicality, Anastasia would get a retrial in 1922. Between his release to await trial and the retrial itself, the main witness against him actually disappeared. He would never stand charges for the murder ever again, but would be found guilty in June of 1926 for illegal possession of a firearm and would be sentenced to 2 years in city prison. By the 1920s, Anastasia had become a top leader in the ILA, which is the International Longshoremen's Association, and would control 6 local chapters of the labor union in Brooklyn. Anastasia allied himself along with Joe Masseria, which in no doubt enabled him to secure the position on the waterfront. At the time, Masseria was a powerful and ruthless mafia leader in Brooklyn, and Anastasia would also align himself and become close friends with Joe Adonis, Charles Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, and Frank Costello. In 1928, Anastasia would be charged with murder in Brooklyn, but once again the witness against him seemed to disappear. In 1930, Lucky Luciano finalized his plans to take over all of organized crime rackets in New York City by essentially planning and plotting killing both leaders of the old line mafia factions led by Salvatore Maranzano and Joe Masseria. Luciano knew the only way to placate Maranzano was to tell him of his desire to kill Anastasia. The problem was that Anastasia was on Luciano's side, and he knew that he would likely never ever assume control of anything with Masseria and Maranzano alive, so it mutually benefited Albert Anastasia to sort of get on board with Luciano's idea. And I think that Anastasia also knew that if he didn't get on board, Luciano would likely have him killed as well. But in turn, he promises Luciano to kill anybody he needs to help him get to the top. Anastasia also realizes that if Luciano's in control of the organized crime, or the mafia as it were, the amount of money and power that he could ultimately wield at the end of the day would run deeper with Luciano at the helm versus Maranzano or Masseria. Luciano at this point also promised to support Maranzano in person on the side. And really what it was a ploy to get Maranzano to just let Luciano do what he needed to do. But meanwhile, Luciano both was going to take out Masseria and Maranzano, which we would obviously know as the Castellamare Wars. In April of 1931, Anastasia participated in the murder of Masseria along with Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Luciano was seated with Masseria, basically having a meeting in a restaurant that Masseria owned in Coney Island. At some point, Luciano excuses himself to go to the restroom, and Joe Adonis, Benny Siegel, Vito Genovese, and Albert Anastasia entered the room and blasted Masseria to death. The war would be over between Masseria and Maranzano, with Maranzano realizing that he had won the war. The problem was he would be the next to go. In September of 1931, Maranzano would ultimately be killed, and Luciano would succeed as top spot in the Mafia. For his help, Anastasia was appointed the underboss of the Mangano crime family, which today would be the Gambino crime family. It was under Luciano that the 5-family structure, as we know it today, would exist. Luciano never wanted to have war between the families again, and felt that if the Mafia was under one structure, one set of rules, and if each family was about earning money instead of ego and fighting each other, the Mafia could survive trappings of the past and the mistakes of past bosses. Luciano also would establish the National Crime Syndicate, which would structurally organize mob bosses from across the country and organize the 5 families of New York City. The syndicate was meant to serve as an organization to help ultimately dissolve disputes, to carve up territories and to regulate illegal activities, including loan sharking and bootlegging, racketeering, and gambling. Luciano would also install a commission so that no one party nor family could overrule the other without a vote. It basically, to sort of dummy it down a bit, it was just basically about let's fucking make money, let's stop fighting each other. If we have disputes over turf, territory, and illegality, let's talk about it. And that really is what Luciano brought to the Mafia in general, was just organizing it to a fashion where it worked like a well-oiled machine. In 1932, Albert Anastasia would be indicted again for murder by ice-picking somebody to death. This case, once again, would be dropped due to lack of witnesses. Then in 1933, he would be arrested for murder again, but this time he killed a guy who worked in a laundry service, and again, there were no witnesses to testify, and all murder charges disappeared. Also, to reward Albert Anastasia for his loyalty, Luciano placed Anastasia and Louis Lepke Buchalter, who at the time was the leading racketeer in the nation, to control the syndicate's enforcement arm known as Murder Incorporated, which was also known as the Brownsville Boys, which was a group of Italian and Jewish contract killers who operated out of the back room of Midnight Roses, which was a candy store owned by Louis Capone in Brooklyn. But originally it was Meyer Lansky who devised the idea for Murder Incorporated as a group who could handle murder and intimidation. And Meyer Lansky felt like because there was Jewish representation that they should have a Jewish representation at the top as well as Italian representation. And Luciano agrees to this, which is why you have Louis Lepke Buchalter and Albert Anastasia pretty much splitting duties at the top of the command as far as Murder Inc. goes. In the decade that Murder Inc. was around, it was estimated they committed thousands of murder, many of which were never solved. For his leadership in Murder Inc., Albert Anastasia was nicknamed the Mad Hatter and the Lord High Executioner. Anastasia, unlike Lepke and others, would never be charged for a single murder done by Murder Incorporated. Some doubt that he even took part in any murders, considering that he was actually an official acting underboss and had his own killers if he had to have an issue taken care of. But we're really never going to know the truth. And I think Lansky had a great sort of novel idea is, we have the five families and we have this. Why allow the five families to do it when we can go to this subgroup and have them taking care of it? They're a fringe group. They're going to be opposite of us. Let's have Jewish representation. Let's have Italian representation. This way it sort of takes the heat off of us. It's sort of what we would see commonly like in the 80s of like Roy DeMeo crew, being subletted out of the crews and et cetera, et cetera. In 1936, Lucky Luciano gets convicted on 62 counts of forced prostitution, which I believe the actual charge was considered pandering. On July 18th of 1936, Lucky Luciano receives a 30 to 60-year sentence in state prison. Vito Genovese at that point would become acting boss, but he would be forced to flee to Italy after getting indicted for murder. That sort of put Frank Costello into the fold, and it made Frank Costello the actual boss of the Luciano crime family. In May of 1939, Albert Anastasia orders the murder of Morris Diamond, who was a Teamsters Union official in Brooklyn who openly opposed Louis Lepke's attempts to control the garment district in Manhattan. Then in the summer of 1939, he organized the murder of Peter Planto, who was an ILA activist who had been leading a movement for democratic reforms on the docks in the form of local ILA chapters and refused to be intimidated by Anastasia or ILA officials. Then on July 14th of 39, Plano disappears. His body was later found in a farm in New Jersey. So right away we see that Albert Anastasia isn't going to tolerate anybody fucking with his business, and that's exactly what Anastasia has done from day one. They don't want to get in line, they're going to go. In 1941, Abe Rellis, a Jewish gangster who was a Jewish gang leader from Brownsville, Brooklyn, who had been supplying Anastasia and Murder Inc. hitmen for the last 10 years, was arrested by law enforcement. It would effectively end Murder Inc. as we know it, but it also allowed Rellis a chance to become a government informant. Because he was facing the death penalty, this is why he turns to the federal government. His testimony actually led to the conviction of 7 members of Murder Incorporated, and Rellis also have information that could implicate Albert Anastasia and the Diamond and Plano murders. He was afraid, Albert Anastasia was afraid of being implicated for that murder and offered $100,000 to anybody who would kill Rellis. Then on November 12th of 1941, Rellis is found on the roof of a restaurant outside the Half Moon Hotel on Coney Island. Rellis at the time was being guarded on the 6th floor room during an ongoing trial. In 1951, it was ruled that Rellis had died accidentally when climbing down a 5th floor using sheets tied to a radiator. The truth is, at the end of the day, that cops knew that there was a $100,000 bounty on Rellis, so they threw him out the fucking window. And that's the truth. Absolute truth. So once again, we see that Albert Anastasia was able to control the narrative. In the spring of 1942, Albert Anastasia orders the murder of Anthony Romero and an associate who was arrested and questioned about the Plano killing. Romeo's body would be found in Delaware, having been beaten and shot multiple times. So once again, Albert Anastasia is not going to put up with any shit. He has a way of getting rid of people, and that's it. During World War II, Albert Anastasia came up with the plan to try to get Lucky Luciano out of prison. He thought the only way it could be done was with some sort of pardon. He was incredibly loyal to Luciano, always was, always would be, and he knew that America needed allies in Sicily to advance the invasion of Italy. And he also realized the Navy had the desire to put money into the war effort in Italy to begin with. And to add to that, he also knew that the Navy was worried about Nazi subs and ships that were hovering close to the American shore, and he also knew that naval ships being built in New York were at risk, and the docks were considered a risk. It was originally Anastasia's idea, and then that gets kind of handed off to Meyer Lansky, and Lansky kind of becomes the broker of that deal. But Anastasia sort of has other plans, and in 1942, what Anastasia does is he joins the Army. A lot of people don't know that he joined the Army, and he did it for several reasons. The first thing was he wanted to avoid criminal investigations that dismantled Murder Incorporated. He was very worried about that. He also thought that if he joined the military, he might be able to get a pass if any more light was shed on previous murders. But then again, he pretty much killed anyone associated or anybody who knew about his dealings, so it was sort of a moot point. He also sort of kind of knew that if he joined the military, he might be able to get U.S. citizenship, and I think that was really what the part of the ploy was. In the Army, he would attain the rank of technical sergeant, and he would train soldiers to be longshoremen at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. In 1943, as a reward for his military service, he received U.S. citizenship, which is what he wanted. And that's probably the realistic reason why he did it, other than wanting to avoid indictments. The following year, he would be honorably discharged and would move his family to Fort Lee, New Jersey. In 1945, U.S. authorities in Sicily send Vito Genovese back to face trial for a murder, the Boccia murder that he was accused of years prior. However, the main prosecution witness was killed and all charges would be dropped. Word is Albert Anastasia took care of that for him. In 1946, Thomas Dewey would commute Luciano's sentence, but part of Dewey's secret ploy was, all right, we'll give Luciano what he wants because he helped us out during the war effort, but I want his ass deported immediately, and that's exactly what happens to Luciano, which sort of renders him almost persona non grata at that point. Also, the Havana Conference would come after this, but that pretty much was a blow that Luciano would not really ever be able to recover from. In 1948, Anastasia would use illicit income to purchase a dressmaking factory in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and pretty much handed over his waterfront businesses to his brother Anthony to watch over. And this was basically Anastasia attempting to isolate himself a little bit, to remain scarce, to avoid prosecution. Then in 1951, the U.S. Senate would summon Albert Anastasia to answer questions about organized crime at the Kefauver hearings. And Anastasia would refuse to answer a single question by sitting there smirking and chewing gum loudly. While Anastasia wielded a shitload of power, he was really only the underboss for Vincent Mangano. Mangano never liked Anastasia, never trusted Anastasia. He did not like his close ties to Frank Costello or Luciano, particularly because Costello and Luciano really got Anastasia's help with a lot of stuff without asking permission from Vincent Mangano. And that made him feel disrespected and also made him not trust Luciano, Costello, or Anastasia. Anastasia was not one to be trifled with on any level, and he and Vincent Mangano argued constantly, almost coming to blows a half a dozen times. Then in 1951, Anastasia had enough and Mangano goes missing. A few months later, Vincent's brother, Philip Mangano, goes missing, and his body would be found in a wetland in Bergen Beach, Brooklyn. Nobody would ever be arrested for the Mangano murders, but Anastasia, in fact, is the one who had them killed. It was a power move based on him to take over the family. And so one of the unique things is, and we're going to keep going here, but one of the unique things is, and I've said this a lot, is that a lot of people use John Gotti for this reference of killing a boss without permission. Carlo Gambino did it. Lucky Luciano did it. Albert Anastasia did it. Vito Genovese attempted to do it. So all of these guys did the same thing. Nobody did anything different than John Gotti didn't do. This is the way things have been handled from the earliest days of Cosa Nostra. So a lot of people like to, when they point at hitting a boss without permission, they like to use Gotti sort of as that scapegoat, but the reality of it is he did nothing different than anybody else didn't do before him. It was a treacherous time for the Mafia. Maybe it gets amplified because of the way it was done. I'm not really sure, but really there is no difference. With Vincent Mangano dead, Albert Anastasia has to meet with the commission. And the reason why he has to meet with the commission is because they want to know what happened to the Manganos. He claimed that the Manganos had basically put a contract out on him. They refused. He totally refuses having any involvement with the killings. I think they knew better, but at that point, it was just his word versus anybody else's. And with Costello sort of on Team Anastasia, the commission confirmed and voted that Albert Anastasia was the new boss of the renamed Anastasia crime family. Costello liked Anastasia, but was very leery of his viciousness and his penchant for violence. But he also needed a close ally because he knew that Vito Genovese was probably going to be an issue down the line. He knew that Vito Genovese wanted to take over the Luciano crime family, and he needed somebody that he could trust completely, and he needed somebody that he knew that would go to the mattresses if need be. Joe Bonanno also voted in Albert Anastasia, even though he didn't like him, but because he was just trying to be a peacemaker and didn't want to see war break out. But we all kind of know moving ahead, ultimately, what a snake in the grass Joe Bonanno would become. But we've got to get there. In March of 1952, Albert Anastasia orders the murder of Albert Schuster. The funny part about this story is that Schuster was basically an informant. Willie Sutton, who was a bank robber, and a very good bank robber at that, was wanted all over New York City for a bunch of bank robberies. And Schuster was on the train, and he spots Sutton. And so what he does is he gets off the train, he calls the police, tells the police which train Sutton is on, and he gets arrested. Later on that night on the news, as they report the details of what happened, Anastasia is so furious that anybody would tell on anybody that he ordered his death immediately. Allegedly, according to sources, he said, "I fucking hate rats. Kill that fuck. I want him dead." On March 8th of 1952, Schuster was shot to death on the street in Borough Park, Brooklyn. It would be government rat Joe Valachi who would tell the government that Anastasia ordered it, but law enforcement didn't completely buy it, and so therefore nobody was ever arrested for the Schuster murder. On December of 1952, the government filed suit to denaturalize Anastasia and deport him back to Italy because he lied on his application. And what we have typically seen about these guys who the government alleges lied on their application means he didn't admit to having been found guilty of any crimes. If he lied about that, then that would get him sort of kicked out of the country, and that's exactly what happened. So to take control of the Costello crime family, which was really the Luciano crime family at the time, Vito Genovese realizes Costello's got to go. Genovese wants Luciano's family. He's got the power and the strength to kind of do it, but he's kind of got a problem. There's no way that he can kill Frank Costello without killing Albert Anastasia. He knows enough to know that if he kills Costello, Anastasia's going to go crazy. So what Genovese begins to do is he begins to look for allies. He would discuss his hatred for Anastasia openly and use his brutality as an excuse as to why he should be removed, saying that Anastasia was unstable, that it would ultimately bring cops, the whole mafia would get taken down with his reckless behavior. Anything that Vito Genovese could say or do to sway others that he would totally go for. Another ace in the Genovese excuse manual was that Anastasia was pretty much selling memberships for $50,000 to the mafia, which would be a clear violation of the commission rules, and it was infuriating high-level mobsters. While it's an accurate gripe and it's an accurate concern, it was never really proven that that's actually what was happening, but Vito Genovese was going to use everything in his power to turn the tide against Anastasia and Costello. Over the next few years, Genovese worked closely with Carlo Gambino and even worked him over as far as trying to get him on board. Gambino at the time was a captain of the Mangano crime family underneath of why am I having a brain fart here? Underneath Mangano. He offered Gambino the leadership of the Anastasia crime family in return for his cooperation in helping dispose of Frank Costello, or at least looking the other way. Genovese ends up getting allegedly approval from Meyer Lansky, which I don't really believe because Meyer Lansky didn't have that sort of power within the Italian mafia. However, the one thing that sort of lends itself to that notion is the fact that Meyer Lansky handled most of Luciano's business interests, and Lansky also had a lot of business ties with Vito Genovese that went back to the 1920s, mainly drugs and etc. Genovese couldn't kill Costello or Anastasia without Lansky's alleged support. But once again, I sort of find this hard to believe. Anastasia pretty much had gotten greedy, and eventually Gambino went along with the plan. Gambino realized that Anastasia and him were pretty much relatively at the same age, and that Gambino realized he probably wasn't ever going to outlive. He might outlive Anastasia, but by the time he became boss, it wasn't going to work out, and he wanted it then and there. So for Gambino to go along with it was a win-win. One of the side issues was that Anastasia was barking for a bigger cut of the profits from Cuba, which pissed off Lansky big time. It also pissed off Lucky Luciano. Lansky told him to go fuck himself, and as a result, Anastasia basically built his own casino in Cuba, which went against everything they believed in. While Lansky could care less what the fuck Genovese and Anastasia were going to do about fighting each other, the problem was escalating, and he basically just turned a blind eye to whatever was about to happen. Keep in mind, Luciano hated Genovese and was tight with Costello, so I don't think Lansky really ever gave permission. I think he just turned basically deaf, dumb, and blind to the whole situation. Now, here's the thing. This is why I don't buy the Lansky synopsis, is because Lansky owned his own casinos there. He owned some outright of his own and didn't kick back to anybody else. So why would it be a problem for Anastasia doing that? Really, technically, it shouldn't, even though Lansky sort of operated and really kind of owned the rights to Cuba itself. I doubt very seriously that Genovese had to go to Lansky for permission. I think, if anything, he went to Lansky to make sure that there wouldn't be retribution for it. But then again, with Luciano not trusting Genovese, I just don't see Lansky putting himself in that position whatsoever. So I have a hard time buying it. Lansky might have known about this a little bit, but I think, like I said, I think he just pretty much went deaf, dumb, and blind to the whole situation. But it would definitely cause problems with him wanting more profits from Cuba, thinking he was above board. That would cause some problems, and that's probably more likely, which sort of allowed Lansky to just kind of turn a blind eye to what was going on. In 1955, Anastasia pleads guilty to tax evasion for unreported income during the 1940s. On June 3rd of 1955, Anastasia was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison and a $20,000 fine. After his conviction, the government successfully petitioned to revoke Anastasia's citizenship so he could be deported to Italy. Then on September 19, 1955, a higher court overturned the ruling. And the ruling basically was because he used his military service as an excuse. And obviously there were some political payoffs that were done to ensure that Anastasia could stay in the country. In early 1957, Vito Genovese decides finally he's going to make his move. He first attempted to hit Frank Costello. On May 2nd, 1957, Vincent Gigante shot and wounded Costello outside of his apartment building. It was pretty much a flesh wound, a grazing hit, but Costello gets the message. He realizes that his time is up, and he retires. Genovese then effectively takes over the Luciano crime family, renaming it the Genovese crime family. Anastasia was absolutely furious and wanted to go to war, but he hesitated, and that was a huge mistake. On June 17th, 1957, Frank Scalish, Anastasia's underboss, and the man identified as selling Mafia memberships, was killed. It's alleged by Valachi that Anastasia had him and his brother Joseph killed as a result of selling memberships. Also, as well, Anastasia was getting a little nervous. Times were kind of tough. Carlo Gambino would then be promoted to underboss, which was another huge mistake. On October 1957, while getting a haircut and shave at the Park Sheridan Hotel off 56th and 7th Ave in Manhattan, multiple masked men entered the barbershop and shot Anastasia at point-blank range. Anastasia lurches off his chair and lunges at his assailants, but missed, and the two gunmen continued to blast Anastasia till he was dead on the floor. Nobody has ever been arrested for the murder of Anastasia. However, Joey Gallo was rumored to be the one who did it, along with 3 others. Gambino at that point would then ascend his throne, and Vito Genovese would as well. And then there's the 1957 Appalachian bullshit, but Costello nor Gambino would ever forget about Genovese's bullshit, and would even set up Genovese years later. So what we see with Albert Anastasia specifically is he was able to attain great power by having a lot of contacts within the Mafia, and ultimately we know that through his friendship with Luciano and Meyer Lansky and some others, he ascends the throne of Murder, Inc. He ultimately decides that he wants to be boss, ends up killing Vincent Magano. They never got along. Then Frank Scalise, who is his underboss, which, depending on what you want to believe, if it's true that Anastasia was selling memberships to the Mafia, it's very simple for him to kill his underboss, Frank Scalise, and blame it on him, which is probably more likely the situation than Frank Scalise actually selling Mafia memberships himself. Then he elevates Carlo Gambino, full well not realizing that Carlo Gambino has aspirations to take over the Mafia himself. Really doesn't realize. I think the big miscalculation here is underestimating the sheer fucking willpower of Vito Genovese. Genovese did a lot of fucking wrong things, a lot of fucked up things. Ultimately, he would pay for that as basically Costello and Gambino rolled on Genovese, and he gets pinched for drugs, and that ends Genovese's power. But if you, this is one of the most interesting times in Mafia history for me, and the reason why it is because there is plotting, scheming, Machiavellian shit going on left and right. And this is something that you don't really particularly see today. I mean, I'm sure there's some Machiavellian shit going on, but like I said, these guys had killed bosses their whole entire career. It started with Maranzano, Masseria, went back to Italy. They did the same thing. They've done the same shit here since the infancy of organized crime. Albert Anastasia was an absolute psychopath, an absolute maniac in a lot of different ways, but the thing that Albert Anastasia forgot, if he forgot anything, was that realizing that he was just as touchable as everybody else. The fact that he did not recognize Carlo Gambino's ambitions were a little strange to me, because Carlo Gambino was a huge earner for Albert Anastasia. But I think truly at the end of the day, I think that they underestimated Vito Genovese. And Vito Genovese had huge issues with Costello. First of all, prior to going to prison, Genovese was sort of given what he wanted, which was boss. Because he takes off to Italy, Frank Costello gets the job, and then when Vito Genovese comes back, he sort of expects himself to be in a higher position. And the fact that they were comfortable with what Frank Costello was doing, they were comfortable with his political alliances, they weren't willing to give really Genovese any more than he already had, which was a captain at that point, and it infuriated him. And that's really what the beef between him and Costello was. He didn't like Costello. Genovese, also his ego in and of itself, especially with the 1957 Appalachian meeting, where he went because he wanted the commission to recognize him as boss of his own family. He wanted them to recognize Carlo Gambino as boss of the Gambino family. So there's all these little tiny things that go into effect, but the 57 Appalachian meeting doesn't happen if Genovese doesn't have an ego. If he just lets it go and meets with one or two guys and they establish whatever it's going to be, then you don't have Appalachian, and we all know what happened as a result of Appalachian. Everybody gets arrested. The Mafia pretty much is on notice at that point, which leads to Joe Valachi and a bunch of other shit. So it's one simple egotistical moment where you feel like you have to be recognized, and it sort of sets up a domino effect for the next 30 years. And that's the reality of it. So I think if there's a mistake that Anastasia made, was he should have just killed Genovese. I don't know why any of these guys. I get what Carlo Gambino did. He was being very Machiavellian, wanted to get what he wanted to get, and then ultimately he would strike in the end. But I just don't understand for the life of me, and maybe I never will, why they allowed Genovese any fucking room to move. And I think a lot of that was because he was very dangerous, very treacherous, and also, you got to remember, he put it on the street that Anastasia was nuts. He was going to bring all kinds of heat to them. His own men were angry. There were rumors that he was selling Mafia memberships for $50,000 and et cetera, which he's not the only one that's been accused of doing that. There were other people, the Angiulo brothers, for example, in Rhode Island, bought into the Mafia. They didn't earn it. They didn't earn it like everybody else. They bought their way in. Say what you want about Ray Patriarca for allowing that to happen, but that's the reality of it. And I think that history will always sort of look at Albert Anastasia as an absolute fucking maniac in terms of killing people. He was an incredible earner. He knew how to move in circles and stuff like that. But I think ultimately, once some guys, and it's not all, but some guys reach a certain plateau of power where they think they're untouchable and they think that everyone is afraid of them, everybody respects them, especially when you look at his youth. Gets away with 3, 4, 5, 6 murders in a short 4-year span. Gets away with every single one of them because he can control the narrative either politically or he can get rid of witnesses. And I think when that happens, you sort of lose sight of who you are. Sure, with great power comes great privilege, and with power comes the means to control a narrative to a certain extent. But I think when you allow yourself to get to a certain level, you cannot forget where you came from, because history always repeats itself. And so the idea that he basically waxed Vincent Mangano and his brother Joseph Mangano to take over, he had to expect at some point that might be an issue. And I think he completely underestimated Vito Genovese. I think he completely underestimated Carlo Gambino. But that's just sort of how it works in the streets. I think we've seen that a million times. I can't say it any better. History always repeats itself, and it always will. People ask me all the time, do you think we're ever going to see like a Lucky Luciano again? No, we're not. Those days are over. Surveillance techniques and et cetera are different today. But the end result is always the same. History always does kind of repeat itself. But you can't hold one accountable and not the other. And so things that were done in the 1940s, the 1930s, carried themselves to the 80s and 90s, just in a different kind of way. You can look at Philadelphia with the John Stanfa, the Ralph Natale bullshit. I don't want to get into that, but you understand where I'm going with it. Angelo Bruno gets clipped. Chicken Man Testa gets clipped. Nicky Scarfo takes over. Nicky Scarfo goes to fucking prison. John Stanfa comes, Ralph Natale comes. So it's all this Machiavellian kind of shit that goes on. And ultimately, it goes back to the same thing of why bosses get killed. The guys around them are unhappy because those around them, Carlo Gambino didn't specifically have that problem. Paul Castellano did have that problem. There have been other bosses. Joe Bonanno had that big problem. Joe Profaci had that problem. They reach a certain level, and they forget about where they came from, and they strangle everybody around them, because the theory and the idea is that you never give somebody beneath you too much money. If you give them too much money, then they won't respect you. But if you give them just enough, and this is some Niccolo Machiavelli shit, but if you give them just enough to want more, then they'll always be loyal because you're the one that's feeding them. But if you give them too much, there's nothing for them to earn. And that's sort of where the whole is it better to be feared than loved comes in. It's easy to be loved, but fear lasts a lifetime, and that's just the reality of it. So not that I'm going to talk about if anybody really wants to understand organized crime, I mean really understand it, read The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. That is the precursor to everything. If you read that, you're going to be blown away by some of the things that you sort of kind of understand. It's like the ends justify the means, that kind of stuff. It's a really good book. It's been read by like a lot of very powerful people. It's allegedly what was the structure for the Mafia, and some of the traditions that they have came from it. So read the book. If you've never read the book The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, please do. It's a good book. I've read it a dozen times. It's always interesting, and I always get different things out of it. So maybe Albert Anastasia should have read that. All right, so all that being said, we're going to cut out of here. We're going to be back next week with an all-new show. Big Q&A, as usual. We like to do that on every show. And an all-new cast of characters. Look for next week for there to be an announcement on the paintings and etc. Take a look at us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Go to Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share the show, and if you hate the show, then go ahead and send death threats. We get a lot of those too. So, all that being said, I hope everybody has a good week, and we will be back next week on Mob Talk Radio.